Maria reached into her pocket at the crowded intersection, her fingers brushing the single folded bill she'd been saving for bus fare. She pressed it into the man's palm without hesitation. "Take it," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "You look like you need it more than I do right now." The stranger, a tall man in a rumpled suit with a split lip and dust on his collar, stared at the dollar like it might vanish. "I can't," he muttered, but his hand closed around it anyway. Cars honked behind them as the light changed. Maria stepped back onto the curb, her empty purse slapping against her hip. She turned and walked toward the grocery store 2 blocks away, knowing she'd have to stretch the rice and beans at home for another day. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she picked up a loaf of bread and checked the price twice. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, rang it up without comment. Maria counted out coins from the bottom of her bag, her mind drifting to the man's face. He hadn't asked for anything. She had seen the way his shoulders sagged, the same way hers did after long shifts at the diner. By the time she reached her small apartment, the sun was low. She boiled water for tea and sat at the kitchen table, replaying the moment. The dollar was gone, but the look in his eyes stayed with her. The next morning, a knock rattled her door before her alarm went off. Maria opened it to find the same man standing there, now in clean clothes, holding an envelope. "My name's David," he said. "Yesterday you gave me your last dollar. I was on my way to a job interview I'd already missed 3 times. That bill paid for the cab that got me there on time." Maria stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment felt smaller with him there, but his voice carried no pity, only facts. He explained he'd been laid off 2 months earlier, living out of a friend's car until the money ran out. The interview had been for a supervisor position at a construction firm. He got the job. "They offered me a signing bonus," David continued, pulling papers from the envelope. "I want to pay you back, but not just the dollar. I remembered your name from the diner receipt you dropped. Maria Ellison. I looked you up." She frowned, folding her arms. "I didn't do it for payback." Tension crept into her shoulders. David nodded, but he placed the envelope on the table anyway. Inside was a check for $200 and a note offering her a part-time bookkeeping role at the same firm if she had any experience with numbers. Maria had balanced her own ledgers for years, scraping by on tips and overtime. The offer sat between them like an unopened door. She spent the rest of the morning at work, her mind split between orders and the check tucked in her pocket. During her break she called her sister, who warned her it sounded too good. "People don't just hand out jobs," her sister said. Maria hung up feeling the first tug of doubt. That evening she walked to the address on the note. The construction office was modest, trailers and stacked lumber outside. David met her at the door and introduced her to the owner, an older man who asked her to total a simple column of invoices on the spot. She finished in under a minute. The owner smiled and offered her the role on a trial basis, starting the next week. Maria left with paperwork in hand, her steps lighter. At home she cooked the last of the rice and allowed herself a second cup of tea. The check cleared the next day, covering rent and a small cushion. Yet the change brought new pressure. Her diner manager noticed her distraction and cut her hours without warning. Maria sat in the break room staring at the schedule, calculating how the new job would need to cover the gap. David texted that afternoon asking how the first day had gone. She replied honestly, nervous but ready. He suggested meeting for coffee to go over the firm's books before she started. They met at a small shop near the site. Over black coffee David shared more about his own rough months. The nights sleeping in the car, the calls from his daughter he couldn't answer because he had no minutes left on his phone. Maria listened, recognizing the same quiet calculation she used every month. By the end of the hour, the tension in her chest eased. She agreed to start the following Monday. That weekend her car battery died in the parking lot after a late shift. She stood in the dark, phone in hand, weighing whether to use part of the new money for a tow. A coworker offered a jump, but the delay meant she missed the last bus. She walked the 3 miles home, shoes rubbing blisters into her heels. The next morning she arrived at the construction office early, bandaged feet and all, determined to prove she belonged. The owner handed her a stack of receipts and a laptop. Maria worked through lunch, finding 2 small errors that saved the firm money. David stopped by her desk at the end of the day. "You did good," he said. She nodded, the first real smile in weeks pulling at her mouth. As she packed up, the owner called her into his office. He mentioned a larger project starting soon that would need reliable help with payroll. The words landed like the first steady paycheck in years. Maria left the building with the contract draft in her bag, the city lights reflecting off the paper. She stopped at the same intersection where she had given away the dollar, pausing only long enough to feel the weight of what had shifted in less than 48 hours. She clutched the paper tighter as a bus rumbled past, its brakes hissing like a warning. The intersection felt smaller now, the same cracked pavement where 2 days earlier she had pressed her last crumpled bill into a stranger's palm without a word. That stranger had looked up, eyes red from more than exhaustion, and muttered thanks before vanishing into the crowd. Now the note in her hand carried an address scrawled in hurried ink, an invitation to a small office downtown that promised nothing yet demanded she appear by 9. Maria walked on, her worn sneakers slapping the sidewalk in rhythm with her quickened pulse. She had spent the night awake, replaying how the envelope had arrived at her door that morning, delivered by a courier who asked no questions and left before she could ask any. Inside sat the single sheet and a check for $200 marked only "for kindness rendered." No signature, no explanation. The amount covered rent and a week of groceries, but the mystery pressed harder than relief. She needed to know why her small act had triggered such a shift, yet the address offered the only path forward. At the corner she paused again, scanning faces. A vendor selling plantains called out in Spanish, his cart steaming with familiar spices that tugged at her stomach. She bought nothing. Money stayed folded in her pocket, untouched. 2 blocks later a bus pulled up and she boarded, sliding into a seat near the back where the window reflected her own face, lined from years of double shifts at the laundromat. The ride downtown passed in silence, broken only by the driver's radio murmuring traffic updates. The building at the address turned out to be a modest brick structure wedged between a dry cleaner and a corner store. Inside, a receptionist waved her toward a narrow hallway without asking her name. Maria's heart thudded as she knocked on the last door. A man in his 50s looked up from a desk cluttered with legal pads. He stood at once, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "You're the one," he said. "I watched you from across the street that afternoon. My brother was the man you helped. He's been sick, no insurance, and that dollar bought him a bus ticket to the clinic before the rain hit. He told me everything when he called last night." Maria sat when offered, the check still in her grip. The man explained his brother had been turned away from shelters for weeks, pride keeping him silent until hunger forced the plea at that intersection. Her gift had arrived at the exact moment he considered giving up. In return, the family wanted to repay what they could, though the amount felt small against what she had given freely. He slid another envelope across the desk, this one containing a job lead at a nearby warehouse that needed reliable sorters. No promises, only an interview the next day. She left the office with both envelopes, the weight in her bag lighter than the questions still circling. The walk back to her neighborhood stretched longer under the midday sun. At her apartment building, she found her neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, waiting on the stoop, arms crossed. The older woman had seen the courier and now wanted details, her voice sharp with concern rather than envy. Maria shared only the job lead, keeping the check private until she understood its source better. Mrs. Ellison nodded, then offered to watch Maria's daughter after school so the interview could happen without worry. That evening Maria prepared a simple meal of rice and beans, the check placed on the table like a fragile truce with uncertainty. Her daughter asked about the paper, and Maria answered with the truth she knew. Someone remembered a kindness and wanted to ease one burden in return. They ate in quiet companionship, the television murmuring low in the background. Sleep came easier, though dreams mixed the stranger's face with the warehouse loading dock and the steady rhythm of boxes moving forward. Morning brought the interview. Maria arrived early, dressed in her cleanest blouse, and answered questions about reliability and lifting limits with direct honesty. The supervisor noted her steady gaze and offered a trial shift starting immediately. By noon she had stacked crates for 4 hours, muscles burning in a way that felt earned rather than draining. The pay stub at the end of the day covered the gap the check had only hinted at. On the bus home she reread the original note, its words now less mysterious and more like a bridge between two ordinary days. The intersection appeared again outside the window, unchanged except for the new resolve settling in her chest. She would pass it tomorrow on the way to work, and the day after, each step carrying the same quiet momentum that had begun with $1 offered without expectation. The city lights flickered on as dusk settled, and for the first time in months the future felt like a sequence of reachable stops rather than an endless wait. Maria's fingers lingered on the strangers for a moment longer than necessary, the single bill passing between them like a secret they both needed to keep. He didn't thank her with words. Instead he nodded once, sharp and certain, then turned and walked into the evening crowd without looking back. She stood there on the cracked sidewalk, her empty purse hanging from her shoulder, the ache in her stomach already reminding her that tomorrow's bus fare was gone. Yet something in the man's face, tired lines around eyes that had seen too many refusals, made the emptiness feel smaller than it should. 2 blocks later she reached her building, the elevator out again, so she climbed the 4 flights with slow steps. Her daughter Aisha was already home from her after-school shift at the corner store, textbooks spread across the kitchen table. "You okay, Mama?" Aisha asked without looking up. Maria set her keys down quietly. "I'm fine. Just a long day." She didn't mention the $1. Some things stayed between a mother and the choices she made when no one else was watching. That night Maria lay awake listening to the radiator clank. She thought about the man again, wondering if he had used the money for food or for a phone call or simply to feel like someone had noticed he existed. Around 3 in the morning her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. She let it ring out. It buzzed again. On the 3rd try she answered. The voice on the other end was the same man from the street, only steadier now. "I don't know your name," he said, "but I used your $1 to buy a charger at the station. My phone died right after. I got through to my brother. He wired me enough to get home. Wanted you to know." Maria sat up, the sheet sliding to her waist. "You didn't have to call." He laughed once, short. "Most people wouldn't have given anything. You did." They talked for 7 minutes. His name was Derek. He had been laid off 2 states away and had been trying to reach family for 3 days. When the call ended, Maria stared at the ceiling until the first gray light crept under the blinds. Morning brought no miracles at first. She made coffee with the last grounds, packed Aisha's lunch with the ends of the bread loaf, and walked to her shift at the dry cleaner. Around 10 o'clock the owner, Mr. Patel, called her into the back office. He held up a printed email. "Someone named Derek left a message at the front desk yesterday. Said a woman named Maria helped him. I put 2 and 2 together." He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside were 3 crisp 20s and a note. "For the $1 and the trust. If you ever need the same, call." Maria folded the money without counting it twice. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, thanked Mr. Patel, and returned to pressing shirts. By lunch the news had traveled through the small shop. 2 co-workers offered her rides home. One brought her a sandwich from the deli next door. Small kindnesses stacked like the $1 had started something that refused to stay small. After work she stopped at the grocery and bought real milk instead of the powdered kind. Aisha noticed at dinner. "Did we win something?" Maria shook her head. "Someone paid back a favor." She didn't explain further. The story felt too new to hand over. The next morning a letter arrived. No return address, just a single sheet inside. Derek had reached his brother's house. His old boss wanted him back if he could start next week. He had included a second 20 and a bus ticket stub as proof he had made it. Maria tucked the letter into the drawer with her important papers. She didn't need the money anymore. The gesture mattered more. That afternoon she walked past the same corner where she had given the $1. A different man sat there now, cap pulled low. She kept walking. The future still felt like a line of reachable stops, only now the stops had names and faces attached. Over the following days, the shop stayed busy. Customers left slightly larger tips. Mr. Patel gave her an extra shift without being asked. Aisha brought home a better grade on her history test and credited the quiet house at night. Maria never told her daughter the full story. Some gifts were meant to be carried alone until they grew big enough to share. On the fourth evening, she stood at the window watching the city lights come on again. The radiator clanked the same way it always had. Nothing dramatic had changed in the apartment, yet the air felt different, as if one honest exchange had loosened something tight inside her chest. She closed the blinds, turned off the lamp, and went to bed knowing the next morning would arrive with its own small decisions. For the first time in months, she looked forward to meeting them. She woke before the alarm, the weight of yesterday still pressing but lighter somehow. The $1 was gone, yet the memory of the man's face. Tired eyes, rough hands accepting what she couldn't afford to give, lingered as she dressed for another shift at the diner. Her daughter slept in the next room. Homework scattered across the table from the night before. Maria checked the fridge. 2 eggs, half a loaf. Enough for breakfast, nothing more. She left a note on the counter and stepped into the hallway just as someone knocked. The same man stood there, now wearing a pressed shirt that didn't hide the frayed cuffs. "I came to return this," he said, holding out a folded bill. Maria shook her head. "You needed it more than I did last night." He didn't argue. Instead, he asked if she had a minute. They sat on the building's front steps while traffic woke around them. He explained he had spent the $1 on a bus token to reach an interview across town. The job was a maintenance supervisor role at a small logistics firm that had just lost its night crew lead. He got the position. Before leaving the office, he mentioned the woman who had helped him when she had nothing. The manager, a woman who had once relied on similar kindness during her own lean years, wanted to meet Maria. Maria's pulse quickened. She had applied to that same company 6 months earlier and heard nothing. The man offered to walk with her. On the way, he spoke of his own setbacks. Layoffs, a car that died, nights sleeping in the terminal without asking for pity. She listened, recognizing the same quiet calculation she used every month to stretch wages. When they arrived, the manager was waiting. She offered Maria a part-time administrative role that could turn full-time within 3 months, covering health insurance from day one. The pay was modest but steady, enough to cover rent and leave room for her daughter's school supplies. That evening, Maria returned home with groceries and a printed schedule. Her daughter read the news twice before hugging her. They cooked together, the kitchen filling with the smell of onions and the sound of laughter that had been absent for too long. Later, alone, Maria opened the window she had closed the night before. Cool air moved through the room. She thought of the $1 now replaced many times over, not by magic but by the simple chain of one person telling another the truth about need and help. The next morning would bring its own decisions, yet she no longer faced them alone. The city outside continued its rhythm, and for the first time in months Maria stepped into it with something close to certainty.